Oh, I don't know, like an 8 to 10 or something like that. We're beginning a paradigm shift. A paradigm shift is a shift from a mindset, one mindset, and positioning of that mindset to another mindset and another positioning of that. So, for example, the mindset that we were in was that you have low inflation, and when you're owning bonds and you're owning cash, or you are operating one way. And you don't worry about that, and companies don't worry about it in their inventories, or having larger inventories, or homeowners don't worry about inflation as much in the purchases of the houses and so on. Once that shift begins, it causes a reinforcing dynamic. It's like everybody is long bonds. We've been in a 40-year bull market in bonds. And so it's been fine to have. And when that shift starts to take place, you see behavioral shifts that reinforce that cycle in the paradigm. So for example, when there is the selling of bonds, that it makes it more inflationary in and of itself, because the amount of debt that has to be sold is not just the deficit, but also the amount of debt that's being sold is those bonds. So now interest rates have to rise a lot, or the Federal Reserve has got to come in there and buy more.
That was Ray Dalio's response to the question, how concerned are you about inflation right now? Dalio sees a fundamental shift in the mindset of how investors and consumers think about inflation and behave in the economy and markets. A big change is coming, and its cause is inflation. Inflation is a tricky concept. Its definition is simple, but its underlying causes are complex. The textbook definition of inflation is a broad increase in prices. In other words, inflation is equivalent to a decrease in the purchasing power of money. The giant fixed income asset manager, PIMCO, explained that inflation poses a stealth threat to investors because it chips away at real savings and investment returns. Most investors aim to increase their long-term purchasing power. Inflation puts this goal at risk because investment returns must first keep up with the rate of inflation in order to increase real purchasing power. Inflation has been on the minds of investors from all over the world over the past few months. The Times recently reported that in the UK, the inflation rate ended above 10%. Meanwhile, in the US, the rate at which prices rise was 8.5% in July, slightly down from June but still quite high from a year ago. Even emerging markets like Nigeria are seeing high inflation. Is inflation temporary, or is it here to stay? That is the question that everyone is trying to figure out. UBS chief economist Paul Donovan, in a recent article for the World Economic Forum, put the emphasis on Russia's invasion of Ukraine as being the main reason for why prices have been increasing all over the world. However, the situation is not quite as simple, and Donovan acknowledges this. The current high level of inflation has been provoked by the extraordinary demand for goods in 2021, as countries emerged from lockdowns, shops opened, and people were able to go out and buy stuff with money saved during weeks of economic inactivity, Donovan said. The measures implemented by governments and central banks during the COVID-19 pandemic, namely higher public spending and easier monetary policy, were sold to the public as necessary tools to support economies and financial markets during the government-imposed lockdowns. Governments borrowed in order to put money in the bank accounts of consumers and to prop up businesses that needed liquidity to survive, given the total shutdown of the world's economy. Central banks cut interest rates, and some of the most important ones, such as the Federal Reserve and the Bank of England, directly pumped money into the economy through various instruments. Here are some headlines from back then. Federal Reserve unleashes unlimited Treasury purchase plan. The Financial Times, 23rd of March 2020. The Federal Reserve just pledged asset purchases with no limit to support markets. CNBC, 23rd of March 2020. Bank of England cuts interest rates to all-time low of 0.1%. The Guardian, 19th of March 2020. European Central Bank nearly doubles pandemic support scheme. DW, 6th of June 2020. COVID-19 drives UK national debt to £2 tn for first time. The Guardian, 21st of August 2020. Fed commits to keep buying bonds until the economy gets back to full employment. CNBC, 16th of December 2020. And the list can go on, but you get the picture. A lot of money was borrowed, created out of nothing, and pumped into the financial markets and the economy to keep liquidity and GDP levels as undisrupted as possible.
Well, that's a big question, of course. The inflation's here. So I'll say 2 years from 2020 to, and over the course of 2021, there was a big debate in economics and among analysts about inflation versus maybe disinflation. Still have inflation, but at a lower rate. And that debate kind of went on through all of most of 2021, but that's over. Inflation's here. There's no more debate about it. The new debate is, will it persist? Will it get worse, which it might, or will it be subdued in some way? Now, I have actually been in the camp. Again, you can see the inflation coming. It's here. It's going to persist for a while. That's the big question. Will it kind of tail off quickly over the next few months, or will it kind of be the dominant theme for 2022? I definitely lean to the latter. However, going out, maybe 9 months to a year, I see that curve bending and getting into a more disinflationary mode, not for good reasons. Has very what does have to do with the Fed, in the sense that they've painted themselves into a corner. There's no way to escape the room. They can subdue the inflation, but at the cost of a very severe recession, not a mild recession, a very severe recession.
In June of 2020, global consultancy business McKinsey & Company reported that global governmental stimulus response to the pandemic exceeded $10 trillion. From this, about $2 trillion were the result of central banks' actions. The amount of money pushed into economies and markets was magnitudes bigger than during the 07-08 financial crisis. Some countries, like Italy, saw its stimulus packages as high as 40% of the country's GDP. Think about that. To pump money of a quantity equal to 40% of the nation's economic output, such actions surely increase the risk of sustained higher inflation. However, Ray Dalio explained in his popular book, Principles of Navigating Debt Cycles, it matters if the new money fills in a hole left by some sort of destruction of old purchasing power. What this means in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic and lockdowns is that if the purchasing power, or the money and credit, which was destroyed due to these healthcare measures, was equal to the amount of the stimulus packages, then inflation would not have been a risk. However, we now know for sure that what the authorities have done in response to the pandemic was far too much. More money than needed were printed and pushed into the economy and financial markets. The Federal Reserve, in a study published in July 2022, agreed with this view, concluding the stimulus packages implemented by public authorities during the pandemic contributed to the increase of inflation that we are witnessing today across many countries. It didn't help that supply chains, the actual part of the economy that delivers raw materials and manufactured goods so that demand can be made, were disrupted for months after the worst of the pandemic was over. Strains in global production networks, which started to emerge in late 2020, are a reflection of imbalances between the supply and demand of certain goods and are creating headwinds for the ongoing global economic recovery, wrote officials from the European Central Bank in late 2021. Delays in delivering goods and raw materials meant that as demand recovered in economies across the world, the supply that ought to have met that demand remained muted, adding further pressure on prices. On top of this, in early 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine, leading to massive chaos across energy markets as Western nations have responded to sanctions on Russian officials and the Russian economy, which, in turn, has stopped the supply of key commodities such as natural gas. This sent energy prices through the roof across many developed nations that were dependent on Russian energy, especially in Europe. All these factors have led to inflation across major economies. Inflation is at levels unseen in decades, and policymakers are grappling with the new reality, or as Dalio said, with the paradigm shift. But can they fight inflation without producing an ugly recession or even a depression? Let us know what you think in the comments below. If you liked this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up, subscribe to our growing channel, and hit that bell icon for future updates.